It was a warm, sunny afternoon in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek Estates, a community where manicured lawns and freshly painted fences projected the image of idyllic suburban life. For many, it was a peaceful enclave, a safe retreat from the chaos of the city, but for the residents of Willow Creek Estates, life under the HOA's strict rules was far from perfect. On this particular day, tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface finally erupted. Sarah Thompson had always been a devoted mother to her 12-year-old daughter, Lily, who had cerebral palsy. Despite the challenges that came with Lily's condition, the Thompsons worked hard to maintain their home and be good neighbors. Yet, in a community controlled by a hyper-vigilant HOA board, being a conscientious homeowner was never quite enough. The HOA, led by a woman named Karen Whitmore, had a reputation for enforcing rules with an almost punitive zeal. On that fateful afternoon, Sarah had received a notice from the HOA regarding a minor landscaping issue, some weeds growing along the edge of her driveway. The notice itself was harshly worded, demanding compliance within 24 hours and threatening fines otherwise. Sarah, juggling her daughter's therapy schedule and her own work, had planned to address the issue the following day. But Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, decided to escalate matters personally. When Sarah approached the HOA office to discuss the notice, she found Karen standing with an air of rigid authority. Karen's posture was immaculate, her designer heels clicking against the tile floor, and her eyes narrowed as she scanned Sarah. What started as a conversation about a few weeds quickly spiraled into confrontation. "I don't understand why you're waiting until tomorrow," Karen said sharply, her voice echoing in the small office. "The rules are the rules. You should have handled this already." Sarah tried to explain, her voice calm but firm. "I have a disabled child at home. I'll take care of it first thing tomorrow morning. There's no need for a fine or further escalation." Karen's expression hardened. "Excuses don't matter here. Everyone must comply immediately." As the tension rose, Lily, who had accompanied her mother to the office, sensed the hostility. She struggled with mobility, using her walker, and her anxiety in public situations was well known. Seeing the interaction escalate, she began to tremble. Sarah moved closer to reassure her, but Karen, seemingly oblivious to Lily's condition, made a move that would become infamous in the neighborhood. With a forceful push, Karen slammed the office door shut behind her as she stormed out, leaving Sarah and Lily standing there. The sudden noise startled Lily so severely that she collapsed onto the floor, crying uncontrollably. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, trying to calm her, but the damage had already been done. Other residents in the office witnessed the scene, whispering among themselves, shocked by the severity of Karen's actions. News of the incident spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Social media groups dedicated to Willow Creek Estates lit up with posts, comments, and videos from neighbors who had seen the confrontation. The video footage showed Lily on the floor, sobbing, while Sarah attempted to shield her from the harshness of Karen's behavior. The story quickly gained attention beyond the confines of Willow Creek Estates, capturing the attention of local news outlets. For the Thompson family, the incident wasn't just about the door being slammed. It was a traumatic reminder of how power dynamics within HOA governance could affect vulnerable residents. The humiliation and fear experienced by Lily were profound, and Sarah knew that something had to be done, not just for her daughter, but for other families who might face similar abuse. By the end of the day, the neighborhood had already begun to fracture. Some residents condemned Karen's behavior, calling it cruel and unnecessary, while others defended her strict enforcement of HOA rules. What had started as a minor landscaping dispute had turned into a full-blown community conflict, revealing the tensions and fragility that lurked beneath the surface of Willow Creek Estate's seemingly perfect streets. To understand why a single door slam could spark such outrage, one had to look at the culture of Willow Creek Estates and the history of its HOA. In theory, HOAs exist to maintain property values, ensure neighborhood standards, and mediate disputes among homeowners. In practice, however, they often become power structures where authority is enforced with zeal, sometimes bordering on obsession. Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, had served on the board for over 7 years. She was known for her meticulous attention to detail, her insistence on adherence to the HOA's covenants, and a no-exceptions policy that left little room for empathy. The HOA rules, printed in a dense 150-page booklet, dictated everything from mailbox colors to the height of garden hedges. While many residents complied without complaint, others, especially families dealing with extraordinary circumstances, found themselves in constant conflict with the board. For the Thompson family, the clash with the HOA wasn't entirely new. Previous minor disputes had arisen over mailbox decorations, the type of ramp installed for Lily's mobility, and even holiday lights. Each time, Sarah attempted to engage with the board diplomatically, but the responses were rigid, bureaucratic, and occasionally dismissive. Yet, nothing had prepared them for the physical aggression implied by a door being slammed in the middle of a child's distress. Neighbors had long whispered about Karen's authoritarian approach. Some admired her dedication to maintaining standards, claiming it kept the neighborhood pristine, while others quietly resented her heavy-handedness. Community meetings often became battlegrounds, with Karen and her allies enforcing rules to the letter and silencing dissent with procedural tactics. The day of the incident, however, revealed the real human cost of this rigid governance. Lily's collapse was more than a moment of fear. It symbolized the vulnerability of families caught in the crosshairs of a system that valued rules over people. It sparked conversations across the neighborhood about empathy, fairness, and the limits of HOA authority. The aftermath of the incident highlighted systemic issues. Many residents admitted privately that they feared confrontation with the board, worried that any deviation from the rules, no matter how minor or understandable, would result in punitive action. Some homeowners reported receiving threatening letters over trivial matters, such as a slightly crooked fence or a birdbath in the wrong location. The HOA, in its quest for perfection, had cultivated an atmosphere of anxiety, and for families like the Thompsons, daily life felt increasingly fraught with tension. Local media coverage of the incident brought further scrutiny. Journalists highlighted the growing trend of HOA overreach, emphasizing how vulnerable populations, children, the elderly, and disabled residents, often bore the brunt of strict enforcement. Experts in housing law weighed in, noting that while HOAs have legal authority, they are also bound by anti-discrimination laws and have a duty to accommodate residents with disabilities. The story of Lily and Sarah became a case study in the delicate balance between community standards and human compassion. In the days that followed, neighbors organized informal meetings to discuss the board's behavior. Some proposed legal action, while others suggested reforms to the HOA's policies. What was clear, however, was that the incident had exposed a fracture in the community's social fabric. Willow Creek Estate's reputation as a harmonious suburban enclave was tarnished, revealing that beneath the picture-perfect lawns lay a culture of control, intimidation, and occasional cruelty. The morning after the incident, Willow Creek Estates was a neighborhood divided. Word of the confrontation had traveled faster than any official notice, spreading through social media posts, neighborhood group chats, and whispered conversations in front yards and driveways. The image of Lily, collapsed and crying on the office floor, haunted residents. For some, it was a call to action; for others, it was an uncomfortable reminder of how easily the strict rules of the HOA could turn human interactions cold and impersonal. Sarah Thompson awoke with a mix of exhaustion and dread. Her daughter had spent the night in a restless sleep, haunted by flashbacks of the door slamming. Even in the quiet of their home, Lily trembled at sudden sounds, hyper-aware of every creak and knock. Sarah's own anxiety was compounded by the knowledge that confronting the HOA legally or publicly could escalate tensions further. Yet, she knew she couldn't let the matter rest. Lily's dignity, her own rights as a parent, and the broader principle of fair treatment under the law demanded action. The first step was to document everything. Sarah gathered photographs of Lily's therapy equipment, the office door, and the correspondence from the HOA that had precipitated the confrontation. She wrote down every detail she could remember from the incident, including exact words spoken, the sequence of events, and the physical reactions of her daughter. Sarah knew that if the matter escalated to a legal or civil complaint, a detailed record would be essential. Soon after, Sarah reached out to an attorney specializing in disability rights and HOA law. Her lawyer explained that while HOAs have broad authority to enforce community rules, there are limits, particularly when it comes to residents with disabilities. Under the Fair Housing Act, HOAs are required to make reasonable accommodations for disabled residents. Slamming a door in a disabled child's face, or causing foreseeable harm, could be interpreted as a violation of these protections. The attorney also noted that this could lead to claims of emotional distress, negligence, or even harassment if the board's actions were deemed part of a pattern of punitive behavior. Meanwhile, the HOA board convened an emergency meeting to address the fallout. Karen Whitmore, the president, attempted to frame the incident as a misunderstanding. In her statement to the board, she claimed she hadn't intended to frighten anyone and that her actions were within the scope of her duties to enforce the rules. However, several board members expressed concern that the public relations disaster could not be contained so easily. A video of the incident had gone viral in neighborhood forums and even reached local news stations. Some homeowners called for Karen to step down, arguing that her behavior reflected poorly on the entire board. Residents of Willow Creek Estates were polarized. On one side, there were those who supported strict enforcement of HOA rules and saw Sarah as overreacting. They argued that the rules were clear and that residents needed to comply regardless of circumstances. On the other side, a growing coalition of neighbors rallied behind the Thompsons. Many were parents themselves or had elderly or disabled family members. They shared stories of prior instances where the HOA had overstepped, sometimes threatening fines over trivial matters or refusing accommodations for legitimate needs. Community meetings became tense affairs. Residents who had previously avoided speaking out found their voices emboldened. Some proposed amendments to the HOA's bylaws that would explicitly protect residents with disabilities and require board members to undergo training on empathy, communication, and legal compliance. Others suggested independent oversight, including a third-party mediator, to ensure that disputes were resolved fairly. The meetings often devolved into shouting matches, with Karen and her allies defending their strict approach while opponents pressed for reform. In the weeks following the incident, the Thompsons faced more than just community scrutiny. Sarah had to contend with Lily's emotional recovery, which involved increased therapy sessions to address the trauma. Pediatric therapists noted that Lily exhibited signs of acute stress, hypervigilance, avoidance of situations reminiscent of the HOA office, and frequent crying episodes. The incident became more than a social or legal matter, it was now a deeply personal struggle. The media attention intensified these pressures. Local newspapers and TV stations covered the story, framing it as part of a broader trend of HOA overreach in the United States. Articles explored cases where residents had been fined for minor infractions, penalized for personal property choices, or forced to remove modifications necessary for accessibility. Interviews with housing experts emphasized that while HOAs play an important role in maintaining community standards, their authority must be balanced against human decency and legal obligations to protect vulnerable populations. Legal avenues became increasingly complicated. Sarah's attorney recommended sending a formal demand letter to the HOA, requesting an official apology, assurances that no further punitive action would be taken, and changes in the HOA's policies to prevent similar incidents. Karen and the board initially resisted, claiming that admitting fault would be an unnecessary liability. Negotiations stalled, creating mounting frustration for the Thompsons. Despite the legal hurdles, a sense of solidarity emerged within the neighborhood. Some residents began to provide tangible support. Neighbors offered to help with Lily's care, assisted in documenting other HOA incidents, and shared their own experiences of facing intimidation or fines. Slowly, a grassroots movement formed, demanding accountability, empathy, and reform within the HOA. This movement highlighted the paradox of HOA governance. While intended to unify and protect a community, unchecked authority could breed fear and resentment instead. Meanwhile, Karen Whitmore's reputation suffered. Local online forums, community newsletters, and social media groups criticized her conduct, painting her as an inflexible enforcer whose actions had directly harmed a vulnerable child. Supporters attempted to defend her, citing her dedication to maintaining property values and standards, but the narrative was increasingly framed around empathy, or the lack thereof. The image of Lily on the office floor became a symbol of the broader struggle between rigid bureaucracy and human compassion. For the Thompsons, the incident also had financial implications. The added therapy sessions, legal fees, and emotional toll placed a strain on their resources. Sarah's professional life was affected as well. She had to take time off work to manage the situation and care for Lily. Yet, through the challenges, Sarah maintained her resolve. She became an outspoken advocate not only for her daughter but for other families navigating the often murky waters of HOA governance. In the end, the aftermath of the door-slamming incident was far more than a moment of conflict, it was a catalyst. It exposed deep flaws in the HOA system, prompted a neighborhood-wide debate about fairness and empathy, and revealed the very real consequences of unchecked authority. For Willow Creek Estates, the incident would leave a permanent mark, an indelible lesson in the human cost of rigid control, and a reminder that rules without compassion can hurt the very people they are meant to protect. The months following the infamous door-slamming incident were a time of reckoning for Willow Creek Estates. What had once been a quiet, orderly suburb under the ironclad rules of its HOA became a community grappling with its own sense of justice, morality, and human decency. The incident involving Sarah Thompson and her daughter Lily had transformed the neighborhood's discourse from the mundane concerns of lawn height and mailbox color to questions about empathy, accountability, and the limits of authority. For Sarah and Lily, life slowly began to return to a more manageable rhythm, though the scars of trauma lingered. Lily, through intensive therapy and the unwavering support of her mother, regained a sense of security in her daily life. The therapists emphasized resilience, social adaptation, and coping mechanisms to help her navigate anxiety triggered by stressful encounters. But more than just personal recovery, the Thompsons became inadvertent catalysts for neighborhood change. Sarah's determination to challenge the HOA set a precedent that reverberated beyond her own family. The HOA, under intense scrutiny, had no choice but to respond. Following public pressure and legal advisement, the board convened a series of meetings open to the community. These sessions were unlike the standard procedural gatherings the HOA had previously held. Instead of simply enforcing rules or issuing fines, the board faced a new reality. Residents demanded transparency, fairness, and accountability. Under this pressure, Karen Whitmore reluctantly acknowledged that the incident had been handled poorly. While she resisted admitting outright malice, she issued a formal apology to the Thompsons and committed to implementing procedural reforms. One of the first reforms was the establishment of a formal grievance committee. This committee, composed of HOA members, neutral residents, and a legal advisor, was tasked with evaluating complaints before any punitive action could be taken. The new process mandated that residents with disabilities, elderly residents, and families with young children be offered reasonable accommodations. It also required all HOA communications to be reviewed for tone and content to avoid unnecessarily aggressive language. Additionally, the HOA invested in training programs for its board members, focusing on empathy, communication, and legal compliance. These programs emphasized the importance of considering the human impact of decisions, particularly when enforcing rules on vulnerable populations. The training highlighted real-world scenarios, including accessibility concerns, disputes over property modifications, and the emotional consequences of authoritarian enforcement. The hope was that by equipping board members with the tools to navigate these challenges sensitively, incidents like the door slam would never happen again. The community as a whole began to shift. Residents who had been silent or fearful started participating in meetings and forums with newfound confidence. Parents shared stories of prior experiences with the HOA that had gone unaddressed, sparking dialogue about fairness and consistency. Elderly residents discussed how they sometimes felt powerless under strict rules, while those with disabilities highlighted barriers to accessibility and inclusion. A sense of solidarity emerged, one born not just from outrage at a single event, but from the recognition that the HOA's practices had far-reaching consequences. Local media continued to cover Willow Creek Estates, framing it as a case study of the challenges and pitfalls of HOA governance. Journalists interviewed Sarah and legal experts, emphasizing the need for homeowners associations nationwide to balance rule enforcement with compassion. Advocates for disability rights used the incident to promote broader awareness of reasonable accommodations and legal protections. In a sense, Lily's experience became a catalyst for national conversations about empathy, fairness, and the social responsibilities of private governing bodies. Legally, the Thompsons explored multiple avenues. While the formal lawsuit never reached a courtroom, the threat of legal action was enough to secure concessions from the HOA. The board agreed to a settlement that included financial compensation for therapy costs incurred due to Lily's trauma and a commitment to the new grievance and training processes. This outcome underscored a key lesson. Communities can enact meaningful reform when residents are willing to advocate for justice, even in the face of entrenched power structures. The experience also prompted Sarah to become an outspoken advocate beyond Willow Creek Estates. She began speaking at community forums, HOA meetings, and disability rights events. Her focus was not only on reforming policies but on encouraging empathy as a core value in governance. She emphasized that rules are essential, but they must never override the fundamental principle of human dignity. By sharing her story, Sarah empowered other residents across the country to challenge unjust practices and advocate for vulnerable populations in their own neighborhoods. The psychological and social impact of the incident left a lasting impression on the community. Karen Whitmore's authority diminished. While she remained on the board for a short period, her influence was curtailed by oversight committees and community engagement requirements. Her reputation as a strict enforcer was forever overshadowed by the negative publicity generated by the door slamming incident. Meanwhile, Residents who had previously feared confrontation began to realize the power of collective action. The neighborhood learned that accountability is not just a legal concept, it is a social and moral imperative. For Willow Creek Estates, the incident also highlighted broader societal issues. Across the United States, HOAs wield significant authority over private communities, often without adequate checks and balances. Many residents remain unaware of their legal rights or the accommodations they can request. The Thompsons' story served as a cautionary tale, illustrating that unchecked authority can lead to emotional harm, especially for those who are most vulnerable. It also showed that communities are capable of change when residents are informed, organized, and persistent. Ultimately, the resolution of the conflict brought a measure of healing to both the Thompsons and the neighborhood. Lily's resilience became a source of inspiration. Her ability to recover, despite the fear and humiliation she experienced, reminded residents that empathy and compassion are essential to any community. The HOA, once a symbol of rigid control, began to evolve into a governing body that valued fairness and inclusion alongside property standards. While the process was slow and occasionally contentious, the transformation demonstrated that even long-established institutions could change when faced with accountability and moral pressure. Reflecting on the incident, Sarah often emphasized a single, enduring lesson. Rules are important, but people are more important. If a community forgets that, it loses its humanity. The door slam that had seemed so small in the moment became emblematic of a larger struggle, one between authority and empathy, between bureaucracy and humanity. In the end, Willow Creek Estates emerged stronger, not because of the rules it enforced, but because of the people who demanded that those rules be tempered with compassion. The story of Willow Creek Estates and the Thompsons became a touchstone for discussions about HOA governance, disability rights, and community ethics. It demonstrated the profound impact that individual advocacy can have, the necessity of legal and moral accountability, and the importance of empathy in creating safe, supportive neighborhoods. The incident remained a cautionary tale for years to come, ensuring that future board members would think twice before placing rules above human dignity. In the quiet moments, long after media attention faded, Sarah and Lily would walk through their neighborhood, noticing the small changes, wider ramps, friendlier signage, and an HOA office that now greeted visitors with respect rather than intimidation. These tangible reminders of progress symbolized a deeper transformation, a community that had learned, sometimes painfully, that rules alone do not define a neighborhood, but compassion, understanding, and accountability do.